Wired magazine released a poorly disguised hit piece on author Brandon Sanderson over the weekend, and some of the things in it are so outrageous that I thought it was worth putting together a quick video on it. I'll add a link to the article in the description of the video. First of all, I haven't read much from Wired since the old days of physical media, so I'm not too familiar with the recent direction of its content. But since when has it been part of their remit to produce hit pieces? And don't be misled here, this is absolutely a hit piece, regardless of a couple of lukewarm compliments that come at the end of a long list of deeply personal attacks and snide remarks. I'll admit that I'm not the biggest fan of Sanderson's novels. I personally prefer to read fantasy that's grittier with more adult themes. But I find Sanderson himself to be extremely personable and even charming. His podcast, Writing Excuses, is a fantastic resource for people that want a deeper look into the nuts and bolts of the fantasy writing craft. He's such a genuinely nice guy, and so universally beloved in the fantasy scene, that this attack on him feels like kicking a puppy, or shooting Bambi. So, let's address some of the criticisms directly. First off, the tone of the piece feels so out of whack. It's written as though an elitist secular hipster from a cosmopolitan city has travelled to Mormon Utah for the first time, and is going through a form of culture shock, sneering down their nose at everything they encounter. There are snide remarks about the quality of the food in the restaurants. For some reason pointing out that Sanderson and his son add salt to their meals, how dare they? Criticism about Sanderson's sartorial choices. The decor and construction of his home, production offices and guest suite. The sense that comes across here is that the author is turning up his nose at all this stuff as though Sanderson is some country bumpkin who struck it rich and is now making nouveau riche faux pas in the spending of his money. The author establishes the theme of the article by expressing surprise that Sanderson has little to no cachet or name recognition outside of the fantasy literature subculture. And then this article becomes about building a case for why this is so by attacking Sanderson's personal qualities. This theme is deeply flawed. There are no fantasy authors that have broken through to the mainstream on the strength of their writing alone, apart perhaps from Tolkien, and that was 70 years ago. George R.R. Martin was unknown outside of fantasy circles until Game of Thrones launched on HBO. J.K. Rowling was likely on the path to becoming a mainstream star, but the film adaptations of her books put a rocket under that trajectory. Best-selling greats of the genre, such as Robert Jordan, Stephen Donaldson, Terry Brooks, are practically unknown. Modern bestsellers like Joe Abercrombie, Scott Lynch, and Patrick Rothfuss are entirely unknown in the mainstream. Literary fantasy is, and always has been, a very insular community of passionate nerds. The suggestion that Sanderson is a bad writer seems way off the mark to me. To back up this assertion, the author provides evidence in the shape of a couple of awkwardly written sentences and the reuse of adverbs. Any author with any substantial kind of back catalogue will have similar moments that slip through editing and review. There are some authors in the fantasy genre like Tolkien and more recently Patrick Rothfuss that write beautiful and flowery prose, but it's most common for authors to write like Sanderson does, keeping the prose as simple as possible, like a clear pane of glass to convey the story, characters and world building to the reader with as little distraction as possible. If we're going to criticise Sanderson for this, we need to criticise 90+% of authors in the genre. I think the worst insinuation in the article is that Sanderson is boring and has nothing of merit to say. This to me is a reflection of the author of the piece much more so than Sanderson himself. It's not Sanderson's job to write the article for you. If you're incapable of putting together an interesting character study of the best-selling fantasy author in the world, then perhaps you're in the wrong profession. If the view counts on his YouTube channel and the podcast he puts out are any indication, there are millions of people that find Sanderson both interesting and insightful. Overall, I honestly wonder what kind of person is capable of being a guest of someone, spending time with their friends and family, accepting their generosity and hospitality, and then doing such a blatant, sneering and unfair hatchet job on them. Baffling stuff.